CardGamesTV1 Podcast. Matchups. Are they real? Well, the concept of matchups, preparing for the meta and things like that, matchups and meta and stuff like that, a lot of this stuff is very irrelevant. For those who know, I already proved that many times that, matchups and formats and whatnot and meta decks ain't that relevant, because when you understand the game, no matter what deck anyone's playing, that deck still has to follow the rules of the game. It's still limited and restricted to what the game, allows them to do. So they can lose just like any other deck. A lot of people like to put a lot of stake on a meta deck being better than every other deck, and in reality, it's actually not. The best decks, besides that side deck, the best decks in any game has always been rogue decks. The problem is that when it comes to popularity, is that people don't play what's actually good. They play what's easy, not what's actually good. So I've been found out, as well as I've been proven, proved that meta decks are not chosen because they are the best deck. They are chosen because they are the easiest to play. And they do good things, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that meta decks don't have, good strategies or anything like that. It's just that their strategies, are typically easy, right? Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a great example of that. For those who play Yu-Gi-Oh!, you would know what I'm talking about. What's popular is what's easy. Now, some people will disagree, and some people will be like, nah, man, this, that, there, like, this deck ain't easy to play. You gotta be good. You gotta know how to play. You gotta know your matchups, blah, blah, all this extra nonsense. When in reality, no. If you truly believe the deck is complicated, it requires a lot of skill, a lot of thought, right? A lot of thinking, a lot of planning, a lot of on-the-fly decision making. The newsflash, that's not a meta deck, that's a rogue deck. That's the point. That's one of the main things of a rogue deck, is that a rogue deck, in the right hands, obviously, because if you're a shitty player, a rogue deck's not gonna do much. But in the right hands of a skillful player, rogue decks are powerful, because rogue decks are inherently futuristic, right? They do things that current decks don't do. There was a time, I'll use Yu-Gi-Oh! For example, but there was a time before, Yu-Gi-Oh! Now everybody is like putting up multiple negates, trying to prevent their opponent from playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, right? Trying to make it where they can't use their cards, right? Now, what's ironic, give me a second. What's ironic is is that before now, right? Now everybody's putting up multiple negates, trying to make it hard for people to play the game. I was already doing that. I was doing that, at the beginning of the game, right? After we got like our first 3 booster sets, I was already doing things like that. I was already looking at certain cards, looking at the ability to control the game. Once we started getting stuff like Jinzo, Imperial Order, things like that. When we started getting cards that floodgate, right, that just flat out just says your opponent can't use a certain card or negate the effects of certain cards, we already was trying to put them all into one deck, and get the most out of it. It took a long time, because I know for a fact, especially looking through the internet at the time back then, not much information was put out there, but on average, when there was some information about people playing at tournaments and stuff, seeing some of the deck lists, it was evident that a lot of people were trying to incorporate certain cards together to create a strong strategy, but it was nowhere near what I was doing. It was very subpar. I was like, oh, these decks look almost like they're trying to be like my deck, but they're not at my deck's exact, you know, level, right? They're not built the same way, but there's some similarities. So I can see that, yes, similarity, because obviously at that time, you know, decks were more generic. Before archetypes and stuff like that started becoming a big thing in Yu-Gi-Oh, it was more generic. So, you know, if you had a card with a good effect, you were going to use it. And if everybody got access to that good card, everybody's going to have that good card. So that everybody's going to, you know, so a lot of people's decks are going to be very, very similar. Different, obviously, in many ways, but very similar. The only thing that made most decks different was, like, maybe some people like spellcasters or something like that, or some people like dragons or something, right? So warriors or something. So the decks would be a little different. But a lot of the staples, a lot of the you know, the commonly used cards, aka staples, will commonly use, obviously. So that's why a lot of decks would look similar. But there's certain cards, specifically monsters, that had really powerful effects that if you use them together would give you a very powerful strategy. Like Jinzo and Spell Canceller and Thousand Eyes Restrict, having all three of those monsters in play at the same time made it hard for your opponent to attack, right? Because of Thousand Eyes Restrict. Granted, it prevents you from attacking, but that's for a different topic, right? But at least your opponent couldn't attack you, right? And you could have tried to find a way to beat them without attacking. Obviously, I had a cannon soldier strategy, so I would set that board up, make it where my opponent can't use spells because of Spell Canceller, use traps because of Jinzo, and then Thousand Eyes Restrict not allowing them to attack or even flip summon anything like a Morphin Threat number 2 or a Man-Eater Bug or anything to help them potentially kill any of my monsters. You know, I would have the advantage until they, you know, find a Exile Force or something, you know, and kill my like Spell Canceller or something like that, and then play like Dark Hole, you know, that kind of stuff. They would have to play certain specific cards to try to break the board. The point is that I would have a board that's hard to break with spells and traps. It's hard, you know, you would have to use like a monster effect, but you couldn't use a flip effect monster effect because you couldn't flip because of Thousand Eyes Restrict, so you were very limited to what you could use. Obviously, Tribe Infected Virus would be one of those options, so you can use it, and that would definitely help you clear the board. So there was few cases where that did happen, where somebody did have the Tribe Infected Virus. But anyway, point is, I was already doing, you know, powerful board, you know, unbreakable boards type strategies, OTKs, FTK, obviously because I was using Magical Scientist at the time, so FTKs. So I was already doing a lot of broken shit at the early stages of the game. But now, you know, fast forward 20 plus years, now everybody's doing what I was doing back then. You know, there were some people, like I said, some people were doing some similar stuff to what I was doing back then, but not exactly doing what I was doing. But anyway, please don't. It just proves the point that I'm clearly built different, because I'm doing stuff way, way, way ahead of everybody else. And that's the thing. That's what happens when you're essentially a rogue player, right? Where you're doing what other people aren't doing. You're ahead of the game all the time. And that's the thing about rogue decks, is that they're always ahead of the game, right? They're always ahead of their time. So before people realize that they're good, you know, they're in the shadows. But there's players like myself who are aware that they're good and they shouldn't be ignored and they should be played. That's why it's not surprising that now, you know, especially in Dragon Ball Super, you have a lot of people topping with decks and playing decks and leaders that most people will be like, oh, didn't know this was good, didn't know that was good. Will be surprised, like, I can't believe this top, I can't believe that top. And it's like, I can, because all these things are good. Any deck can top an event. That's just that should be common sense, because it's not really the deck that's ultimately the deciding factor of winning and losing, right? It's the strategy and then the decisions that are made while you're playing. You know, I'll use myself as an example, obviously. Pretty much 99% of my decks, right, they're all made to win. They all have a win con. They all have a strategy that as long as you pull off the strategy, you are guaranteed to win. So the decks are consistent in winning if you played to win, right? If you make sure that your opponent doesn't, pull out a victory, right? Make sure that that if you have, cards in your hands to negate attacks, that you have the energy for it. Don't be in a scenario where you only have one energy and you have an Oceanus in your hand. Obviously, that could be the moment where you lose because you can't drop the Oceanus. If you could drop the Oceanus, that would change the game, right? Obviously. So you want to make sure that you don't make too many mistakes that ends up causing you to lose the game, right? You lose the game because of your decisions, right? You lose the game because you didn't win, and you lost the game because your opponent did win the game. It's not necessarily that your opponent was a better player or anything like that. It's more likely that you just didn't win, right? You were one turn from winning, and since you didn't get to that turn because you either A, didn't have the right cards, or B, maybe your opponent had the counter for your card, right? Let's say you tried to drop Oceanus and your opponent hit you with Swift Retaliation Cooler. It's like, oh, good for them. They had the cooler. If they didn't have the cooler, the Oceanus would have hit the field. They wouldn't want to attack because they're more likely to lose if they tried to, by decking out. So, and then of course next turn you're gonna win if you get there, right? The whole point is to get there. So if you are not, if you don't make sure you get that extra turn, then that's why you lose. It wasn't necessarily that your opponent was a better player, because like I said, if they have a counter to your card, okay, they got it. They got a way to stop you. There's not a lot of skill in that. They just so happen to have the card. That's it. They have the ability to stop you. So as long as you're able to pull off your win con, you're gonna win. That's the whole point of why you chose your win con, because that's what it's for. It's to give you the victory. Then there's other ways of winning, obviously, in the game. Milling your opponent out, auto win effects, winning in time by having more life than your opponent, right? Whether you burn your opponent or you gain life, so you can make sure you always have at least one life more than your opponent, or at least sneak in a double strike on your opponent before times run out, so that way you can make sure your life is higher than them. I've done that. But you get the point. It's like, what determines if you win or lose is not necessarily your deck. It's you most of the time, right? It's largely you and your opponent, right? Because y'all decks can't play by themselves. A lot of people like to put things on decks, and that's where the whole matchup bullshit comes in, where it's like, oh, this deck is weak against this deck and that deck, and it's like, no, it's not. The decks aren't weak. You are. It's always annoying to see people literally try to blame inanimate objects, try to blame pieces of paper for them losing certain situations. And the funny thing is, the way I know for a fact that it's them and not the decks is because I don't lose to those types of decks, or at least I don't lose the way they do. If I do lose, it's because I made a bad play, or I just didn't win, right? Like, let's say I had my win con, but I didn't make sure that my win con was, I made sure, like, let's say my win con doesn't have deflect, right? But I didn't make sure that my opponent didn't have a blue unison to prevent gas in the trunk. So if I play my win con and they got sealed, all right, well, that's on me, right? That's a me problem, right? That's my fault. I allowed them to God seal, right? So, got no one else to blame but me, and that's the way it should be, right? That's the way everybody's supposed to think, that if you lost, it's because you lost. It wasn't the matchup. It wasn't your your deck or your opponent's deck or whatever nonsense that people like to use as an excuse. It's like, you know, we all choose what we put in our deck. So if your deck is losing certain matchups or just losing in general, that's on you. That's not the deck. That's on you. Right? You made the decisions to play the cards you play. If you feel that your deck is not at a high level, right? It's not good enough, then that's your fault. You should have made it better. You should have built the deck better. That's the importance of building a deck instead of net decking. And this is part of the problem with people net decking, is they'll copy a deck thinking it's good just because somebody else did good, but don't realize that they did good. It's not that the deck did good, it's they did good. Not everyone can play the same deck and get the same results. Everybody's different in certain ways. We're similar, yes. We're similar in many ways. You could learn how to play my decks the way I play it. That is not impossible, right? The way I play is not exactly rocket science, but ironically, a lot of people do try to make it seem like the way I play is complicated or it's just the wrong way of playing. But I get the results that I get because of the way I play, and it's consistent results. So, and I'm only just improving it, right? All I'm doing with my way of playing is improving, getting better, right? That no matter how the game changes, no matter how the players change, like let's say players start playing differently, right? And I've noticed some drastic change in the community where players, you know, start to play certain strategies similar to the ones that I play, certain tech cards. Shit, we even just got a rules update. A rules update on a card that I've been using for a long time, Majin the Fire West Supreme Kime, where you could tap her for energy. But the way they originally ruled it was she can only be used to pay for the cost of a card, not for the effect, not for skill cost. So you couldn't use it for like a rival or for Union Absorb or anything of that nature, like that requires energy in order to activate the skill. So you used to not be able to use it for that, even though when you look at the wording of the card, it says you can treat this card as if it's you can tap it for energy as if it's in your energy area, even though it's in your battle area. But it never was written that this can only be used to pay for the cost of cards, which would have been obvious that, oh, okay, clearly I can't use this to play skills, you know, the cost of skills. But no, they had to make a ruling that says you can't use it for skills, and now they changed the ruling to the way it should be, where it's just like, yeah, it should be used this for skill, because the whole point of the card is that the card counts as energy in the battle area, and energy can be used to pay for skill costs. So why was she an exception? That was weird to make her an exception. The whole idea is what makes her unique is that she counts as energy in the battle area. That's her skill, is you treat her like energy in the battle area. So you should be able to do anything you want with it. So that was an interesting thing, right? But the point is that now, you know, she has been properly ruled, right? Where she has her proper ruling, where she does pay for skill costs. So now she makes a lot of different strategies stronger, which is, you know, very important. And that adds to what I can do with, you know, the decks that I play, that I use her in. It opens up different stuff. Alright, kind of got a little off track with using her as an example, because now I forgot what I was talking about. Obviously, I'm talking about, like, you know, the format, you know, the people, you know, the game, the way people like to play, how I play different than everybody else. Because most people focus on individual stuff, you know, like, oh, this person's playing this leader, I gotta play this way, or this person's playing these battle cards, so I gotta play this way. I gotta have this, you know, anti-hand control. I gotta have anti-graveyard. I gotta have this, that, and third. Like, people put so much into trying to have stuff for certain specific situations that they don't realize you should be playing stuff that's generic instead of trying to play stuff that's specific. Play generic shit. Play stuff that has more than one use. You know, for those who have followed my masterclass videos, I've already explained and showcased the ideas of like why I use certain unisons. Because, for example, right, the blue unisons, most of the blue unisons that I have, almost all of them have a draw effect. That helps me against hand control. So I don't need to play specific cards against hand control. I don't have to play specific cards to deal with turning the tide, right? Edge of 17 turning the tide. Perfect Force Cell. I don't need cards to specifically deal with these cards. I have cards. I have cards to draw. I use my leader's ability to draw when it attacks, and I use my leader's ability to draw cards when it awakens, if I'm using that type of leader. So I already have ways to draw that can help me counter the effects of my opponent, doing hand control. The other thing I do to combat hand control is I try to play my cards fast enough. I try to get cards onto the field and have a strategy that as long as I get the cards on the field and the cards stay on the field, I have advantage, that I won't need hand advantage, right? So I wouldn't need cards in my hands that much as long as I have what I need on the field. For example, Giant Force, right? Raditz Giant Force, lets me draw every turn, lets me double block every turn, right? And lets me attack, right? With a 19k bite. So it does a lot. For a 3-drop unison, it does a lot. Draw, attack, defend. It does a lot for one card. As long as I get that on in play with any of my blue decks, I'm good against hand control. I'm good against turning the tide or any other strategy similar to that. Right? I'm good against aggro, and the list goes on of what I'm able to deal with and able to defend and combat with. This is why I don't, most of y'all who've been following me for a long while know that I don't complain about a lot of things. Right? I don't be like, oh, aggro is too strong right now. This, that, they're like you hear other people complaining. Because other people complain about matchups. They'll complain about a deck being too strong. Oh my god, this deck's too strong because it turn 2 kills you. It's like, yeah, turn 2 kills you. It don't turn 2 kill me. I think maybe one time I got killed on turn 3. And this was some weird, what is it? Mecha Cobora, type of, Gogeta wormhole type, deck. It was just some crazy, deck that did some wombo combo stuff. And I was impressed. I was like, oh, this is some unique shit. I mean, the fact that you were able to do all this and essentially kill me turn 3. Maybe it was turn 2. Anyway, the point is it was very rare. The point is losing that early in the game is very rare for me. But for a lot of other people, apparently it's not that rare. Shit, I've never lost to Mecha Frieza. Full power Mecha Frieza. But a lot of people have. A lot of people have lost to, to Cell Zeno and cards like that. Some people have lost to 7-drop Gogeta. Some people have lost to Perfect Force Cell. There's a lot of things people have lost to that I haven't lost to. And I've played against these things. I've had these things be played on me, but I didn't lose. At least I didn't lose that turn. Might have lost a couple turns later, but didn't lose that turn. A lot of people lost immediately as soon as these cards were played. So that's the difference in the skill level, in the readiness. Even if you don't want to look at it as a skill, as me being skillful, whatnot. Okay, let's go with that. Let's go with I'm not that good at the game. What I am, however, right, is I'm prepared, as opposed to being good at the game, right? I'm prepared. right? Prep time, kind of like Batman, right? I'm prepared. So I make sure that my decks consist of, barrier hate, right? Consist of reliable defense, like, unison blockage, floodgate negates, board wipes, draw engines, or at least cards to draw. Sometimes super combos, sometimes, right? Depending on the deck, right? Sometimes super combos, right? These kind of things that people will see a value, right? What other stuff? I don't really use counterplays like that, but I do. I'm not against using effects on my opponent's turn. So any card that can do something on my opponent's turn is very useful. So I have no problem with interrupting or, doing something against my opponent on their turn. So there's that. What else? Ramping. That does matter because it depends on my strategy or win con. Obviously, having win cons, those are important. Having a strategy to win the game, and the funny thing is, I tend to revisit a lot of my old strategies and make them more consistent. Right? It's not that they're not good. It's not that they can't win the game. Right? Obviously, they obviously can. It's just that they might not be that consistent because I might not have the right set of cards that can help, or it might not be the cards themselves. Sometimes it could just be how I play the cards. I've actually been in some scenarios where I realized that I was using a deck wrong, right? That's ironic, right? To say how I'm using a deck wrong, even though I'm the one who built the deck, I still used it wrong, right? So I've learned a couple times that I was using a couple decks the wrong way, as in, if I played the deck a little different and used certain cards in a different way than the way they were intended to be used, then I would get different results. So that's where I get back to the whole having generic cards and then learning how to use those generic cards in different unique ways. Like, I look at card effects and I look at how could I use this? How could I use this other than what it looks like? Because I read a card like everyone else and I'm like, okay, so I guess they want me to, Bandai, right, wants me to use this card in a certain way, right? Let's say the card is a negate attack, right? It's a battle card that negates an attack and has the ability to bounce a 3 cost or less on the field back to the owner's hand, right? Now, at first, most people would think, oh, I can negate an attack and bounce one of my opponent's 3 costs or less to the hand. Cool, that could potentially stop 2 attacks for 1 energy. That's a good card, right? So some people will look at it that way. But when you look at it real closely and look at the wording, it says a 3 cost or less on the field. Not on your opponent's side of the field, on the field. That means even your own cards. That changes things. So when I noticed that, I'm like, oh shit, this says field. That means I can even bounce my own cards. Oh, that changes what this card can do. Oh, this gives me other ideas, and that's what I look to do. Find other ways to use the card, Sometimes there'll be a card that says bounce your own card back to hand, your own battle card back to hand, in order to activate the card's effect. At first, you'll see that as a negative, like, oh man, I don't want to bounce back one of my, strong battle cards back to my hand just to activate this effect. But like I said, if you look at it again, you'd be like, oh shit, I can bounce something back to my hand that has a really good effect that when it comes into play, it does something cool, like a boonie. Shit, bouncing boonie back to my hand, playing it, get tokens, bouncing back to my hand, get tokens, and the tokens can be used as combo power. Oh shit, this is some good shit right here. That's a good combination. That's how Flute was when you first saw Flute. It's like, wait, bounce on the card. I think it was like just bounce a battle card on the field, period. And then people would, I know I was one of the first to think that of, ooh, I can bounce my own cards. I can play Bodyguard Electric for free, swing with it, play Flute, bounce it back to my hand, draw a card, right? Bounce it back to my hand, play it again for free and swing with it, and then Champa it so it double strikes. That way I could do 3 damage, right? Like that's the kind of stuff I was thinking as soon as I saw Flute. I'm like, yeah, the ability to bounce a battle card back to my hand that I play for free, and then play for free again, and then attack with it. That's gonna be nice, right? So, and then you draw a card, so you're not losing anything out of that line of play, right? So your hand advantage will still be, big. So this is, the kind of stuff that I look at, right? I look at, the potential of what a card can, not only what it could do now, but what it could do in the future. That's the other thing. And that's where, rogue decks, are superior to meta decks. Because meta decks is just trying to be good now. Because I've seen plenty of times that people will refer to an old meta deck as like jank or junk, or, oh, I didn't know that was meta. That used to be meta. Like, how do you not know it used to be meta? Like, you would. So it lets you know that meta decks aren't, necessarily the best decks in the game. They're just popular at the time that they were popular, right? So anything can lose popularity over time. The thing about rogue decks is their strategies tend to be really good and really strong, that other decks, especially meta decks, typically tend to copy off of meta decks. Off of rogue decks. So this is why it's not too surprising when I see, meta decks looking a lot like my decks, or looking a lot like rogue decks. Where it's like, man, I remember seeing somebody that used to play this strategy, these cards. Now I'm seeing everybody playing this strategy. I guess this strategy became meta all of a sudden. And that's all it is, right? It just, once something becomes easier or popular, that it becomes meta. It's not that, it was always good in people's eyes. They just chose not to play it. Like, no, they didn't know it was good until somebody else showed them that it was good. The point was, yes, it was always good, just people didn't know it was good until someone actually showed that it was good, right? It only takes one person to make a difference. That's the irony. It only takes one person to make it obvious that certain cards are good, or certain cards are not necessary, or you can play the game without super combos, and the list goes on, right? Of things that I've proven that you can and can't do, right? You can play a deck full of unisons. You can play the game without super combos, and the list goes on of things that I've shown you can do, or can't do, or don't need to do necessarily. You could play whatever you want. You just got to understand the game so you can beat the game at the game itself, right? Beat the game at its own game, right? Understand that the first 4 damage is easiest, next 2 requires a little effort, and the last 2 is the hardest. I repeat that over and over again because it's true. Never stop being true. Even when we get these Z cards, the first 4 damage is going to be easiest, next 2 is going to require a little effort, and the last 2 is going to be the hardest. That's still going to be true. Maybe in a year or 2 from now, it'll be like the first 6 damage is the easiest, the last 2 just requires some effort. Could that be the future change? Could I end up changing it to that, where the first 6 damage is the easiest and the last 2 just requires a little effort? That's true, and that probably already is like that right now if you really think about it. I can consistently do 6 to 7 damage with very little effort, so it doesn't seem like the first 4 damage are the only damage that's the easiest. Well, at least it's not for me. But I see a lot of people just still only do like 4 damage at most. So I just feel like, I guess just everybody else still haven't gotten to the level that I've gotten to, where I could do more than 4 damage easily. But with the ability to rejuvenate in blue, oh man, that's gonna be interesting. That's gonna be tough. It's gonna be funny when I play somebody and then they start rejuvenating, like, oh, you son of a gun, you're undoing my work. Stop gaining life. That's gonna be funny to see people rejuvenate in blue, like, god damn it. So blue might be a little bit of a problem in the near future because of the PyCon unison I'm already, using it. It's already busted. Already shown how strong it is and how you can win with it competitively just through time itself, not even through just beating your opponent, right, through attacks and stuff, just by making sure you have life points higher than your opponent. And definitely show how busted it is with set 2 Zamasu. So there's that. And people will consider that rogue. But then someday that's gonna be meta. Somebody's gonna be like, yeah, set 2 Zamasu with Pycon Unison, busted. It's like, well, yeah, always. Well, that leader has always been busted. I've done a lot of busted stuff with the leader, so nothing new there. But yes, Pycon definitely makes it even more busted because gaining it already. The leader I always refer to as having 2 health bars. So essentially, it has double. You have double life when you use that leader. Then to have the ability to gain life on top of that, the ability to gain life when you have double life, you technically have 16 life. Then you have the ability to rejuvenate, and you could rejuvenate maybe 2 to 3 times in one game. So that's essentially up to 19 life. You have up to 19 life compared to the fact that your opponent is doesn't. Your opponent, only has a maximum of 8 life that they can play with, and that's if they're not using a leader that cuts their life in half, right? Like King Piccolo or something like that, or Beerus and Champa leader, which reduces your opponent's life. Like, imagine, I definitely wouldn't recommend those leaders. Especially with rejuvenate being a thing, because it wouldn't be that hard for your opponent to keep their life higher than yours and just win in time. But anyway, so it's just like when it comes to matchups, I kind of got a little bit off topic, but still on topic. It's just like matchups don't matter when you're good at the game itself. It doesn't matter what you're going up against, what decks you're playing against, because I said it before, every deck's pretty much the same. Every aggro deck is an aggro deck. Every control deck is a control deck. Every mill deck is a mill deck. Every hand control deck is a hand control deck. Like, it's not too difficult. The thing is being able to recognize it. Because some people will look at a certain deck and see it as like a control deck, when in reality it's more of a like an aggro deck with some hand control. And they might not even realize that, because they're just like, oh, this is, or they might notice that there's elements of hand control, and they'll be like, oh, this is just a hand control deck, but don't realize it's an aggro hand control deck, right? They might not notice the aggro part of it until the aggro part becomes relevant, and it's like, oh shit, this deck's fast and it has hand control. It's like, yeah, it's aggro hand control. So you didn't realize that it had a combination of both playstyle. Once you realize that it has, then you're able to adapt and be like, all right, gotta keep my defenses up, because this deck does have aggro capabilities, but it's hand control. So I gotta establish some type of draw engine to try to help me deal with the hand control, because the hand control is trying to weaken my hand so that way I can't defend against its aggro, which is a good strategy, right? To combine aggro with hand control. Those are 2 powerful strategies that you can combine. Another powerful combination, playstyle combination, is control with mill control, right? Because you're making it hard for your opponent to, kill you, right? Let's say they're playing aggro, for example. Since you're playing mill control, you're able to control the aggro part of their deck while milling them in the process. And milling is your win con, right? So you're more likely to win through that than through attacks. Or the possibility of you having more life to your opponent. That's another possibility that you have to consider. That's why playing rejuvenate effects, for example, since we have the blue Pycon Unison, using that in Janemba is going to be busted. So I expect people to play Janemba. I think I posted a Janemba deck profile with rejuvenate already. Yeah, pretty sure I did, like a couple weeks ago. Anyway, where it was sharing that idea, like, yeah, recycling and rejuvenating to keep yourself in the game longer, so you can mill your opponent out, or at least win through having more life than your opponent. So you have 2 win cons in one. You either win by milling your opponent, or you win by having more life than your opponent. So that's the thing. So I do expect more people to play Janemba, in the near future. Whether it be this year or next year, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? The point is that I do expect more people to play that strategy or play similar strategies and make the most of it. It's like, yeah, I mean, Invoker Rejuvenate will be pretty decent because, Invoker, does, burn, but throw in Rejuvenate, and now it can always guarantee that it has more life than their opponent. So even if you don't win through Catastrophic Blow, you can win just by having more life than your opponent. You can just Catastrophic your opponent just to make sure they have less than you, win that way, or Rejuvenate, gain life, just to make sure your life is higher than your opponent, in case you can't do the Catastrophic Blow. That way you have 2 ways of potentially winning: gaining life or dealing damage. So there's that. Obviously, they could incorporate mill into their deck, since they're playing red and blue. Incorporate some mill, and bang. Now they have 3 different ways they could potentially win. Win through burn, win through life gain or rejuvenate rate, or win through mill. I mean, of course, they could just win through attacking. That's an option, but sometimes that's a hard option. That's a hard option to take advantage of, because some decks do have certain strategies and abilities that make it hard to get past their defense. And if it's hard for you to deal your opponent damage, then winning through attacks is not as reliable as you want it to be. So you need some backup strategy, backup win con, and that's where the whole winning in time thing comes in. The whole mill strategy thing comes in. Even using burn for game, finding other ways to deal damage, right? So those are the things to consider. But yeah, man, matchups. It always just cracks me up how people would complain about matchups and talk about preparing for the matchups and preparing for the meta and this and that. It's like, and to me, meta is just another way of just saying matchups, right? Like whenever they say, "Oh, I gotta prepare for the meta," it's like, oh, you just try and prepare for matchups. Not really the meta per se. It's just the matchups. It's like, if you go up against a certain deck, you want to have the advantage on it. I get it. But why don't you make your deck so good that no deck is a match for yours? That's why I don't believe in matchups. Because I don't believe any deck can match up to my decks, right? It's like, because like I said, it boils down to decision making that determines who wins, who loses, right? If I use a floodgate negate a turn sooner than I should have, then if I lose, that's on me. I should have saved the floodgate, right? I should have saved it. If I fall into a gas ceiling trunks, that's on me. I can't blame the deck for that. I can't blame the meta or my opponent's deck for that. It's like, no. If I fell into something, right? If I fell into something that was obvious, that's on me. I actually had that scenario happen once. I think twice, but when I mean once, it's like once. When I went to a locals, where my opponent didn't have a blue unison, right? But I knew they had the gas in trunks, but they didn't have a blue unison, so I wasn't worried about it. But then the turn in which I was going to play my my 6-drop Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta Super Warrior, the one that lets me ramp up to 4 energy. I was the turn. So before the turn, I was going to play that card. My opponent played the Majin Buu unison, which I forgot that he did that. I forgot that he played it. I forgot that it was there. So when it was my turn, I played my energy, and I was like, all right, tap 6, drop in the Vegeta, once I dropped it and looked over his board and saw that he had the blue unison, I'm like, shit, he's gonna God seal, and my opponent did God seal. Shit, it would be nice if my opponent didn't, right? I'm like, oh shit, I got lucky. He didn't God seal, But no, he had it. He played it. He got me, and that sucked. The thing is that if I noticed he didn't have the gods, if I remember that he played the blue unison and he can God seal now, I would not have played that play. I would have instead played my 5-drop unison, my Super Saiyan 4 Goku Protector of the Earth unison, and use that to stall until I got to turn 7. And then turn 7, drop Turning the Tides, because he can't God seal Turning the Tides. And my whole goal was to play Turning the Tides anyway. That was the whole point. I was playing Turning the Tides, set 2 Zamasu Turning the Tides stack. So the idea was to play Turning the Tides. So I intended to ramp up to 4 energy, use the 4 energy to play, use it to play like a Floodgate Negate. I think it was a Gohan's Baby's Minion, and try to, stall until next turn. That way next turn, I can drop Turning the Tides, still have energy up, right? Have a 30k beat stick on the field plus a 25k beat stick, right? And then go for game that way. So that was the plan if he didn't have the unison. If he didn't God seal, or I should say, if I didn't let him God seal me, that would have been the play, and that would have been the strategy, and I would have won. But I messed up, and he got me with a God seal, which put me in a bad position, put me in a weak position, and if I'm right, I did eventually get to drop Turning the Tides the following turn. I think that's what happened, or I did play the Super Saiyan 4 Vegeta and ramped up. Anyway, I gotta go to work. But the thing is, I don't care much for matchups, because like I said, I don't consider anybody else's deck capable of matching up to my deck. It's just more about decision makings and more about making sure that as long as I play my cards right, and play my win con, I'm gonna win. If I don't play my win con, well, I'm obviously gonna lose. And that's just how it goes. It's less about matchup and more about, circumstances. And that's the end of the video. Podcast.